Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you here this morning. In May of last year, Missouri partnered with the state of Louisiana and private plaintiffs to file a landmark lawsuit against dozens of officials in the federal government to stop the biggest violation of the First Amendment in this nation's history. My office obtained more than 20,000 pages of evidence detailing extraordinary censorship efforts by a variety of officials within the federal government. My office also deposed key witnesses, including Dr. Anthony Fauci and officials from the FBI, State Department, Department of Homeland Security, Office of the Surgeon General, and the CDC. The evidence that we've uncovered only begins to scratch the surface of these First Amendment violations. Ultimately, the lawsuit is about obtaining truth and accountability. Last month, a federal judge heard oral argument on a motion for preliminary injunction filed by plaintiffs in this case. The judge expressed skepticism over many of the federal government's responses to queries posed by the court, even likening the situation to George Orwell's novel 1984. Concerns have been noted by the United States Supreme Court. Justice Gorsuch recently opined that federal officials may have pressured social media companies to suppress information about the pandemic policies with which they disagreed. The 20,000 plus pages of documents my office has uncovered reveal that Justice Gorsuch's suspicions are in fact a sobering reality. The government's strategy to suppress speech in violation of the First Amendment is threefold. First, officials attempt to harm big tech companies by threatening to remove their legal protections or by issuing statements deeply harmful to the company's public image. Second, backed by previous threats, officials communicate behind doors with tech, flagging specific speech that officials dislike and badgering the companies to suppress that speech. Third, once officials have threatened tech companies and flagged specific content, the implicit promise arrives. If tech companies censor when asked, the government will back down from their public statements to harm the companies. As former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has boasted from the White House podium, they certainly understand what our asks are. And the censorship activities have grown so widespread that the Department of Homeland Security last year worked to create a disinformation governance board to coordinate efforts to censor between government agencies. Following these efforts, the court has characterized DHS as the nerve center of a federally directed censorship enterprise, as we saw in coordination between officials at DHS and the FBI in their attempt to silence the Hunter Biden laptop story in the weeks leading up to the 2020 election. Big tech companies have shown themselves eager to censor in recent years. It is also clear from the evidence that much of the speech affected would not have been removed but for the government's express involvement. The judicially misconstrued Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act has made it much easier for the government to create its vast censorship network by granting certain companies far more protection than Congress ever contemplated. The incorrectly interpreted Section 230 has enabled social media companies to consolidate control into the hands of a few enormously powerful actors. This consolidation reduces the pressure not to censor that would otherwise exist in a competitive market, while also making it much easier for federal officials to exercise pressure over the social media field. The federal government itself recognizes the legal problems with its actions. In an attempt to make it harder to detect their blatant legal violations, officials have begun outsourcing their censorship activities to pseudo-private organizations. Emails obtained reveal that officials believe this structure will help them evade liability under the First Amendment. But any federal attempt to censor speech is still unconstitutional. The government cannot do by indirect means what it would be prohibited from doing directly. The evidence also shows that federal censorship enterprise targets conservative voices. Last month, Biden's lawyers conceded in open court nearly all content suppressed by the federal government is conservative. This is not about truth. It's always been about power. Perhaps most troubling, Biden's lawyers recently shared with a judge that they have no plans to discontinue their censorship network. That admission makes this case one of the most important First Amendment cases in our nation's history. The freedom of speech enshrined in the First Amendment is the bedrock of this great nation. It's one of the fundamental rights guaranteed to all Americans. With this lawsuit, we're fighting to protect our liberties from all government interference. No government official has the right to tell us what to think, what to say, or what to hear. That's why this case is so important. The question of our time is whether Americans will enjoy the legacy of free speech handed down to us by the founding generation, or whether government will control what we say, what we hear, and how we debate the veracity of claims and arguments. We're locked in a pitched battle for the very character of our nation. If we do not prevail over the government officials who seek to control speech, millions of Americans will be left with what Justice Gorsuch has described as a shell of a democracy with civil liberties just as hollow. Thank you.